Sandy Hook, Uvalde, Parkland, these places have become synonymous with the senseless murder of children. And here in Chicago, every weekend brings more shootings and deaths from gun violence. The United Methodist related child advocacy agency, Kids Above All, has responded to this epidemic with a new campaign called Protect Our Kids. To find out more, we welcome Dan Kotowski, Kids Above All President and Chief Executive Officer. Dan, tell me a little bit more about Kids Above All and this campaign, Protect Our Kids.
Well, at Kids Above All, we build better lives for children and families impacted by poverty and violence and systemic injustice. And one of the ways in which we're doing that right now is by making sure that kids are protected from military-style assault weapons. You know, right now, the profits of the gun industry, the manufacturers are bypassing the safety and the security and the independence of children and families. And so what we're trying to do is make sure we raise awareness about the fact that it's not assault weapons above all, it's kids above all. And so we have an opportunity to make sure we engage people in an effort to reach out to people who make policy. Those are elected officials who can get a ban on assault weapons and high capacity ammunition magazines. As you noted, Anne Marie, the number of shootings that we've seen, these mass shootings across our country, including Highland Park, happens all the time in the city of Chicago. We are seeing that happen on a regular basis. And the consistent factor that we've seen across the board is these mass shootings that involve high capacity ammunition magazines from military style assault rifles and pistols. So we've been focusing on engaging people, and we've thankfully we've seen a lot of interest and involvement from people in the community, and that's been exciting to see, because we hope to see a change in policy. And then people are getting involved in our camp that we have for kids who've lost family members to homicide, called Camp Sheila. And this is a camp for the vast majority of children and teenagers have lost somebody to gun violence. And so we have a camp that involves, over the course of a year, one-on-one therapy, support groups, and then a weekend-long camp that helps, kids to manage symptoms related to trauma and begin to, take charge of their story as it relates to their grief and get them on their healing journey. And the last component of this is people have an opportunity to support what Kids Above All is doing. As I indicated, we build better lives for kids and families impacted by poverty and violence and systemic injustice. And we do that through early childhood education, foster care and adoption, and housing for homeless teenagers and young adults, all with counseling provided throughout that. And it's so important, while we're providing these services, that we're making sure that kids are going to be safe, that they're make sure they're going to be protected. So the Protect Our Kids campaign is ensuring that the 2,541 children and families that we impact every year with Kids Above All, and also kids throughout the Chicagoland area and their families, are able to make sure and get what they need in terms of the safety that they deserve and the freedom that they deserve from the type of violence that we're seeing. And so this Protect Our Kids campaign is saying to everybody, it said, what would you rather do? Protect the interests, the self-interest, the profits, and the greed of the gun industry and those who make assault weapons, or protect the safety and the security of kids? And we're saying, we're thinking, and we know that people are going to opt for protecting our kids.
Absolutely. So what are you asking people to do, or politicians, and how are we going to get the gun manufacturers to listen?
Well, I think we get the first and foremost, we got to get the politicians to listen. Because the people who make and sell assault weapons, they're in it to generate a lot of money and revenue, and they are targeting young people. They know that young people are their future consumers, and they have in their ad campaign to directly market young people. So they're very smart about what they can do to generate profits. So literally, young people are being targeted as consumers, but they're also being targeted in the sense when then someone's using these weapons against them. A lot of children are dying. It's gun violence is the leading cause of death in our country and in our state. So one of the things we need to do in order to hold the gun manufacturers accountable is to make sure that the people who are elected to represent the interests in the safety and the security of children and families are doing whatever they can to make sure that they pass laws to protect children from gun violence. And one of the ways you can do that is to pass a law, a meaningful piece of legislation that is going to call for a ban on military-style assault weapons and high-capacity ammunition magazines. In all the states where those assault weapon bans have been passed, you've seen a reduction in death and injury caused by gun violence. And as a result, children and families are safer. The second way people get involved is they can volunteer for our Camp Sheila campaign. That's named after Sheila Doyle, who was killed by gun violence, and a way in which people can get involved. They can volunteer for the camp. They can volunteer in working with kids who've lost family members to homicide and help them on their grief journey. And the third way is they can provide financial support to kids above all, because as you can imagine, it requires investment from the public to make sure we're providing our service, but we continue to raise awareness about what's going on and how people can truly make a difference as it relates to passing laws and policy that's going to keep kids safe from military-style assault weapons and gun violence in general.
You're obviously very passionate about this. What's your personal stake in it? How do you react when you hear the gun violence that is happening across our country?
Well, I see first and foremost, I'm a father. My wife and I have 2 boys. We're concerned very much about their safety. We're concerned about the safety of children, throughout our communities and our state and our country. As someone who's a survivor of a crime, I'm someone who went through something that was difficult. My wife lost somebody very near and dear to her to gun violence. So we care passionately about this issue. And we know a lot of people who've suffered. And you would have thought after some of the mass shootings that occurred a long time ago that the entire country would have stopped and just collected itself and taken definitive action to make sure children are going to be safer. And we didn't see that happen. So I carry very deeply as a parent, as someone who's as a survivor, as someone who's married to someone who's lost somebody very close to her to gun violence, and also as someone who knows a lot of people who've been, have endured, the sadness of the tragedy related to gun violence, who've survived shooting, who've lost children to gun violence. I mean, it's so pervasive, and it's so sad that this is something that we see constantly throughout our country, throughout our communities, that we haven't seen the type of action that should take place. Our kids right now, our kids in the future, our families deserve better. And so at Kids Above All, we place the safety, well-being, and education of kids above everything else. And it's like, what would you do, Anne-Marie, for your own children to make sure that they were going to be safe, right? And we say this to people all the time. We say it like at our culture at Kids Above All, we treat the kids in our care like they're our own family members, like they're our own children. And so if you are truly concerned about the mission, if you're out there thinking about what can I do to keep a child safe, what can I do to make sure to protect children, let's start to make sure that we contact people who are responsible for passing policy that is going to make sure that fewer assault weapons are going to be in the hands of very dangerous people. And that's what that policy will achieve. And that's what we'll see, a greater amount of safety. And we'll see the type of, communities and cities and states that, children and families deserve to have.
As you mentioned, you would think there would have been change by now, but we keep time and time again seeing these mass shootings, especially with young children. Do you think that this can really make a difference? I mean, how do we affect change? We
affect change by literally doing exactly what the gun industry and their lobby does. They are very involved. They are very engaged. They do not ever take their foot off the gas when it comes to trying to protect their self-interest. And so the vast majority of people in this country, close to 80%, want to see some sort of a universal background checks or protections as it relates to keeping people who are dangerous from getting guns or restrictions on military-style assault weapons. It's just a matter of making sure that people who make decisions, who are elected officials, who vote on these bills, hear from you. So the part of the essence of the Protect Our Kids campaign is to connect people directly. You can go on our website at Kids Above All, .org, kidsabovall.org, and the Protect Our Kids campaign is right there. And you could through that Protect Our Kids campaign, send a letter directly to your elected official. The software we have already sorts it, and it says you put in your address, and it gets it right directly to your state representative, your state senator, and they will get a letter from you, which specifically talks about the fact how important it is when we see the number of children who died and injured as a result of mass shootings, to pass a meaningful piece of legislation which would restrict military-style assault weapons and high-capacity ammunition magazines. So what's really, I think, the next step that we've taken as an organization at Kids Above All is, if we're really serious about placing the safety, well-being, and education of kids and families above everything else, it's giving people the tools to get involved and engaged and seeing meaningful policy passed so that we can have a better, safer state.
So Dan, how would you respond to someone that may feel that this policy might infringe on their gun ownership and their rights?
Nothing we're proposing will do that. What we're advocating for is to protect kids and families from military-style assault weapons with high-capacity ammunition magazines that can kill a large number of people and wound a significant amount of others in a very short period of time. So the reason why we're advocating for this is because the gun industry and their lobby have advocated for years that the possession of these weapons is beneficial in some way. And it's not, as we've seen for children and families. It's the leading cause of death for kids. We've seen 400 mass shootings that have been involved in that have occurred and throughout our country in this year alone. And then we've seen that gun violence is the leading cause of death. And so nothing we're proposing has anything to do with that. It all has to do with keeping kids and families safe from military-style assault weapons with high-capacity ammunition magazines that are excessively dangerous and that are sadly designed for war. And they're just semi-automatic versions of these weapons that are used in conflicts where people are battling. These are our children who are now on the battlefields, and our children and families who are dying in record numbers. So I would just say that what we're proposing is just a meaningful step forward to make sure that we're going to protect the safety, security, the freedoms of our kids. And too much of that conversation is often on that other end. And I want us to be talking at Kids Above All, and what our organization wants people to be talking about is the safety, well-being, and education of children above everything else. Because if we're really serious about building better lives for kids impacted by poverty and violence and systemic injustice, it's not just about direct services, which we provide. It's about passing and advocating for policy that's going to allow them to attend school and be safe. It's going to allow them to walk the streets of their neighborhood and be safe. It's going to allow them to go to church and be safe. It's going to allow them to go to the movie theater and be safe. It's going to allow them to have a long life, which they deserve to have.
But other ways that maybe they can talk about this within their own churches and get people to advocate for this?
Yeah, I think to communicate and share kidsabovall.org and our message. And I think, I would say from the pulpits, the adult education, the youth groups, and saying, look, there's a group that's out there and it's trying to take definitive action. Like, there are ways to get involved in Kids Above All. We have volunteer opportunities. We have service projects. People get involved in a host of different ways, but there's also another way now that you can get involved to actually make a difference as it relates to, passing meaningful legislation that's going to save lives. So I would say communicate to the parishioners that are people, the congregants, and just talk about, like, look, there is here's a way to get involved. Reach out to kidsabovall.org, go on the website and see that you can actually contact your elected officials and get something done.
Thank you, Dan, for sharing more about this campaign. I'm Anne Marie Gerhardt for Different Drummers and the Greater Chicago Broadcast Ministries. Keep the faith.